do that? How did you come up with the decision to proceed? Thank you.
Let's see, I can take that one. Great question. Obviously, that the incident on the 14th of November, it was late in the evening, was a concern for us. When the initial breakup occurred, the debris was very concentrated. Over time, it is dispersed, but initially it was very concentrated. And as ISS passed through the orbit of the debris, we had a heightened elevated concern for about 24 hours after the event. In fact, we had the crew take a number of different actions on board, including going to their safe haven, their crew return vehicles for 2 of the passes.
Find out, among other things, that it'll pose the next question to you. What was it like to wake up after having never gone to sleep? That was when you were born.
That we will do, but there's some that we actually took off the list. Now that we understand the environment, what it really tells us is EVA has always been risky. And so though the 7% is a small increase, that is well within the flux that we see in the natural environment. So it's not elevated over what we've seen. We've had EVAs in the past with even higher MMOD risk. For Space Station as a whole, there are about 1,700 new objects, larger objects that are being tracked. It will take a few months to get all of those cataloged and into our normal debris tracking process where we can then assess missed distances or how close these items get to ISS. Those are our standard kind of conjunction.
Thank you. Our next question will go to Marcia Smith with spacepolicyonline.com.
Thanks so much, and I'm not sure who this is for. I'm actually curious about the robotic arm that ESA has on the Nauka module. Is that something that can be used for work on the U.S. OS, or can that only reach areas on the Russian side?
I can start with that, and if Vincent has anything to add, he's free to add to it. It's really designed for use on the Russian segment, so all the planned activities and interfaces are compatible with the Russian segment, so we don't have any planned use or operations for it.
And Vincent, did you have anything to add?
Nope, nothing to add. Just as you saw in the graphics from Art, all the work we're doing is on the P1 truss, where we'll use the Canadian robotic arm for that.
Great, thank you. And speaking of robotic arms, we actually have a question from social media for Art or Vincent from Kate on Twitter. Wants to know who will be operating the robotic arm during tomorrow's EVA.
So
Go for it, Vincent.
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. So we have Matthias will be what we call M1, so he's the primary robotics operator. And then Raja will be what we call the M2, so kind of looking over his shoulder and doing some of the communications with the EV crew and the ground. So it'll be all the onboard robotic operators for tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Our next question will be back on the phone bridge. We've got Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Yeah, hey, thank you. I think this is for Dana. And I'm really not asking this because of the ASAT test, but the whole thing's made me re-ask a question I wondered about. What does the 7% refer to? I mean, does that mean there's a 7% higher chance of a puncture? Is it a 7% higher chance of any kind of impact? I mean, what do those numbers actually mean is what I'm wondering about in terms of MMOD risk to an EVA.
It does mean penetration, but it doesn't mean it's a catastrophic penetration. And so when we talk about risk numbers, both to ISS or to the suit, we talk about a particle size that could penetrate the structure. For the suit itself, there's a certain size of penetration that is supportable. There's an emergency oxygen package on the suit that would feed it for a while. So it covers that range and, of course, larger items also. Just to give you a feel for it, when we talk about EVA risk, it's generally around 1 in 2,700. So that's considered the risk of having some size of a penetration over the duration of the 6.5-hour EVA.
2,700 EVAs. You would get hit once. Is that what 1 in 2,700 means?
That's basically how you could think about it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question during the Q&A portion of the briefing, please press *1 to be added to the queue, or you can submit your question on social media using #AskNASA. We've got another question on our phone bridge here from Chelsea Goad from space.com.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is for Dana. You mentioned that while there is, only the 7% increase, there were some get-ahead activities that were taken off the list for the spacewalk tomorrow. Could you go into detail about what get-ahead activities were taken off of the schedule, and if you could confirm that were these taken off the schedule because of the additional debris created by the Russian ASAT test the other week?
Yeah, I'll answer it in terms of the philosophy that we used, and then I'll let either Art or Vincent fill in some of the other details. Some of the get-aheads that we do in particular for this EVA that we thought were important to leave on the list are those items that enable us to use future robotic capability to replace failed boxes. So one of the ones that we are going to do is some bolts on what we call a battery charge discharge unit. If we spend the EVA time tomorrow while we're in the vicinity to remove these bolts, then in the future, if that box fails, we don't have to go out and do a spacewalk. We can do a robotic replacement of it. So that is a risk buy down for the future in terms of not having to do a spacewalk to respond to that. So just at a philosophical level, those are the types of things that we left on the table. And then there's a few other things that we ended up taking off. We had to make a decision pretty early on in terms of what we were going to ask the crew to study and prepare to do. And so before we really had an understanding of the debris environment, we wanted to be conservative. So of course that was factored in. And then the other item I mentioned, about 1,700 other objects, though they're not just a specific risk to the EVA, because we aren't tracking those yet and because we can't do our normal conjunction assessments, they do pose some elevated risk to ISS, increased uncertainty, and so we didn't want to leave the crew out longer for items that we didn't consider critical.
We'll take another question on our phone bridge, this time from Joey Roulette from the New York Times.
Hey, my question was already asked, but I guess to follow up on that last one, what specific tasks did you take off the list as a result of, the increased risk from the ASAT test debris? And I guess, was it a direct result from that debris, or were there maybe other reasons? Thanks.
I can take that one as far as what we took off the list. There's two major ones. One is what we have called CP8 cable routing. So this is an Ethernet cable that runs out to the port zenith camera. So this will make it a Wi-Fi hotspot in the future. We do have this timeline on a future EVA, so there really wasn't a big driver to do this as a get-ahead. So we do have a plan to get that one done. We also have one that's releasing bolts on a spare nitrogen tank. This is something that would save time on a future EVA should we ever have to replace this tank, but again, it wasn't a critical task. So they were all things along those lines. We do expect the S-band replacement to take the majority of the EVA, so we're not expecting to have a lot of get-ahead time, but we still have a few things on the table just in case we have some extra time.
And I'll just add to that again, because we had to make the decision about the content of the EVA a couple weeks ago, and we didn't have all of the assessment data in, and so we didn't understand yet what the debris environment risk increase was. We were conservative in eliminating things from the spacewalk. The 7% in and of itself is not a large increase, and that's well within what we see with normal atmospheric fluctuations and the normal amount of debris that kind of moves through. So that wasn't the specific reason, it wasn't tied to the 7%, it was just tied to trying to be conservative until we really understood our new environment.
Our next question comes from social media. Dana, we have a question for you kind of on the history of the S-band antenna. It's from Ben Evans on Twitter, who wants to know kind of generally how long has the failed S-band antenna been on the ISS? Has it ever experienced problems before? When did the replacement arrive? Anything you can give us about that?
It's been operating for a long time. I would have to get the specific dates for you, but it's been pretty steady and doing well into this last checkout. But let me pass it to either Art or Vincent to see if they happen to remember the dates.
Yep, it actually flew almost 21 years ago, so it's actually been working for a really long time. And the spare flew in 2010, so it's 11 years old, hasn't been used yet. It's been out there on the express logistics care, just waiting for this case to be used. So again, the person who designed our S-band antenna did a great job. It's really lasted a long time.
Thank you. We have another question from Marcia Smith from Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much. I was wondering if Dana could provide an update on the status of the discussions with Russia. I know that several NASA people were over there, and they were talking about crew exchange, I gather, but also Rogozin has put out a statement saying he's talking with NASA about possibly using the ports on Prichal. So could you just give us an update of where things stand now that I assume everybody's back?
Yeah, sure. We've had a lot of good discussions with our Russian colleagues about doing a crew exchange. I think, as you know, it's always been our goal to fly astronauts and cosmonauts on both vehicles, both the Soyuz and our crewed vehicles, and so those discussions are moving along very well. We are targeting next fall to start that exchange, so the hope and the goal that we're both working towards is to try to fly a cosmonaut on our fifth SpaceX vehicle, USCV-5, and then to fly one of our astronauts on the Soyuz. So those discussions are still progressing and going very well. The new node, I think, was your other question. The Russians do have plans for using that node for all of the alternate docking ports. It's not unlike our node. Of course, our node is bundled already with permanent modules attached to it, but in this case, they've got multiple different docking ports that they can use for future visiting vehicles.
Rosen said something that they were talking with NASA about docking Crew Dragon there, possibly.
We haven't had specific discussions about that. The docking interfaces between the two vehicles are quite different. There's a probe and cone style docking system that the Russians use, and ours is a very different interface. So today, those are not compatible interfaces.
Something on the talks about the crew exchange. What is it that turns a hope and a goal into a signed deal? Who is it that has to finally sign that on both sides?
We will sign. Our initial agreement for the details of that will be assigned at the program level, and of course, there's a lot of details, as you can imagine, when crew members start training in each other's countries, et cetera. So there are a lot of drafts in work, and so hopefully we'll get something signed very shortly.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you to all of those who submitted their questions on social media and here on our phone bridge today. And thank you to our briefers for joining us and making us all a little smarter about our EVA and a little more excited for tomorrow's spacewalk. NASA TV coverage will begin at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time for the spacewalk that's scheduled to begin around 7:10 a.m. and will conclude about 6.5 hours later. Thanks again for joining us.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that
decision to proceed? Thank you.
Let's see, I can take that one. Great question. Obviously, that the incident on the 14th of November, it was late in the evening, was a concern for us. When the initial breakup occurred, the debris was very concentrated. Over time, it is dispersed, but initially it was very concentrated. And as ISS passed through the orbit of the debris, we had a heightened elevated concern for about 24 hours after the event. In fact, we had the crew take a number of different actions on board, including going to their safe haven, their crew return vehicles for 2 of the passes. That we will do, but there's some that we actually took off the list. Now that we understand the environment, what it really tells us is EVA has always been risky. And so though the 7% is a small increase, that is well within the flux that we see in the natural environment. So it's not elevated over what we've seen. We've had EVAs in the past with even higher MMOD risk. For Space Station as a whole, there are about 1,700 new objects, larger objects that are being tracked. It will take a few months to get all of those cataloged and into our normal debris tracking process where we can then assess missed distances or how close these items get to ISS. Those are our standard kind of conjunction assessments. And so that's still work in front of us as those items get cataloged.
Thank you. Our next question.
There's an alignment pin that you can see right here. And then there's also two spring plungers. You can see one in the kind of the top and bottom of the screen. So these help hold it into the soft dock feature. On the truss itself, there's a ramp surface on this receptacle, and then there's a lip here that the spring plungers will engage into. And then you'll also see that there's a receptacle for the alignment pin. So as you bring these together, the crew will need to make sure that they have proper alignment because they're going to want these spring plungers to ride over this this canted surface and fall underneath this lip. So as they bring it into place, you'll be able to feel it, and then they'll need to wiggle it a little bit in order to get those to engage. And then once they're fully engaged, it'll pop into place, and then the bolt will be aligned so they can continue to drive the bolt and ensure that it's aligned well. It is a little tricky to get off at times. It's something that we've seen on previous spacewalks when we've dealt with these S-band antennas, so the crew is well prepared to handle that if we need to. So I think that was all that I had, but there's been a lot of work that's happened on the ground and on orbit. The crew has done a great job preparing for this, so we're ready to go for tomorrow's spacewalk. And with that, I will turn it back over to Chelsea.
Thanks, Art. Can't wait to see it in action. And thank you to all of our briefers. We're now going to start taking some questions on our phone bridge. If you're dialed in and would like to speak your question, please press *1 to virtually raise your hand and enter the queue, and *2 if you'd like to lower your hand if your question already got asked. We'll also be taking questions on social media using #AskNASA. And if possible on the phone bridge, if you could say who your question is for. So to kick us off on our phone bridge, let's go to Mark Carreau, Aviation Week.
I'm not sure who might best answer this question, or it might be a couple, but how did you assess whether there's a debris threat from the anti-satellite test that occurred earlier this month, and how did, if you did do that, how did you come up with the decision to proceed? Thank you.
Let's see, I can take that one. Great question. Obviously, that the incident on the 14th of November, it was late in the evening, was a concern for us. When the initial breakup occurred, the debris was very concentrated. Over time, it is dispersed, but initially it was very concentrated. And as ISS passed through the orbit of the debris, we had a heightened elevated concern for about 24 hours after the event. In fact, we had the crew take a number of different actions on board, including going to their safe haven, their crew return vehicles for 2 of the passes.
Thank you.